I'm Mark Bates. Today, I'm about 155. My diabetes has been in full remission, and I don't need to take any meds. But I used to be nearly 200 pounds, type 2 diabetic, on a stack of meds, and honestly, I felt like my health was slipping away. That all changed when my wife and I adopted our son. We knew we had to get healthy, not just for us, but to raise him right. So I spent over a decade researching, studying under top experts, and becoming a certified metabolic health practitioner. And I reversed my diabetes, dropped the meds, and got my life back. Now I help others do the same. If you're tired of guessing and ready to take control of your health, join my free newsletter and work with me as your health coach. Let's rebuild your health together.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Mark Bates, and this is the Morning Rant. Okay, so today what I want to talk about is the longevity of textbooks. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit of my background and why I know something about this. I've got advanced degrees and taken a lot of graduate courses in three major fields. One of them is business and accounting, because that's where I made my living for like 35 years. IT and accounting. And so a lot of work there. And that stuff tends to be pretty good in terms of keeping up to date. Then the second area was theology. I got lots of work in theology. And what I'll tell you there is the rule of thumb in theology, and this goes for a lot of other areas, is that what you're being taught in college is about 20 years old. That the new stuff is what the graduate students and the profs are working on in terms of their research, right? And that gets published, and then after some time after it gets published and accepted, then it gets brought into the classroom, and that then becomes what the standard folks are taking in normal classes. So in that level, in terms of theology, that seems to be pretty obvious that if your pastor, for example, just got out of seminary, the stuff that he was being taught is probably about 20 years old, right? And in 20 years, there's going to be some new thinking, some new research that is coming up, and that's what newer pastors will get. And then that holds up, and that works pretty well, because theology doesn't change a whole lot. There have been some interesting things with archaeological discoveries that have changed a couple small things, minor things in terms of theology, but it changed the way we think about certain things. But it's there, right? Now, here comes the fun stuff. The other area where I did a lot of work, and obviously it's in my metabolic health and nutrition area. And here, for some reason, the longevity of textbooks seems to be going on for years and years. And I think most of that is because that textbooks and that research is what made up, and this is my opinion, made up the groundwork of what is big pharma, big medicine, and big food. And those guys have a vested interest in terms of what they produce and how they make money, that nothing changes on that, right? And so one of the key examples is when I was taking a lot of nutrition courses, the thing that everyone used to talk about is the 7-country study done by Ansel Keys. And Ansel Keys is well known because he worked with the Army, and he helped develop the K rations and stuff, which is the food, the prepared packages food that would go out with the soldiers. And the idea was to provide them the minimum amounts to keep them fed in a nice compact form, so that when they're in the field, soldiers can keep going and fighting, and that's important. And so that's where he became famous. And he did thing called the Minnesota Study, which was actually called, which in theories, but people really said it was the Minnesota Starvation Study, because what it is, he took these people who were uh, conscientious objectors, did not want to go into military service but wanted to help out, and so he brought them into his lab in the University of Minnesota, and basically he starved them to see at what point do they stop functioning well. And it didn't take too long before the people just stopped working out well, and they started having all kinds of problems. And it's well known. So we know what happens if you don't eat, or if you eat very, very little, right? And that's thanks to Ansel Keys. So he did some work. Now, in his seventh country study, what he did was he was looking for what caused heart attacks. And this is a big deal because in the 50s, President Eisenhower had a heart attack. And heart attacks were pretty much unknown in this country, let's say from 1920 and before, right? And the first couple heart attacks started coming in the 20s and 30s. And by the end of World War II, we started seeing more. And in going into the 50s, we started seeing a bunch of them. And there was this big question: what is causing all these Americans to have heart attacks? And so Ansel Keys said, "Hey, well, let's look into it." Now, the thing you gotta understand about Ansel Keys is that he was a diehard vegetarian. I personally think he was affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which was a church that practices vegetarianism. I can't really validate that, but there seems to have been a lot of cross-pollination there. And I'll explain that in just a second. But Ansel Keys went out and he found it. He found 7 countries. Now here's the kicker: he actually studied 20, but he in his report he only talked about 7, right? And what he said is that the higher the saturated fat, and predominantly the higher the animal fat that people ate, the more heart attacks they had. And that was his big thing. And so he said, no fat, no animal fat, no saturated fat. That's when we started switching to seed oils, margarine, lean meats, and we said that's going to solve our heart attack problem. And that was in going into the late 60s, going into the 70s, and then right after that, the McGovern Commission. This is right after McGovern ran for president and lost badly. He headed up the Senate Commission on what should be the American diet, and working with the Agriculture Department, they came out with the food pyramid at that point. And he had all these scientists coming in and talking to his Senate committee. And the 2 big things about McGovern and that whole study. First of all, McGovern himself, as far as I know, was not a Seventh-day Adventist. There's no evidence for that. But he did just finish, before he started these Senate committees hearings, a long stint in the Pritikin Center. And Pritikin Center is a place that helped you avoid heart attacks, is their big claim. And it's based on one study done by Nathan Pritikin. And Nathan Pritikin was deeply affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he was a hardcore vegetarian. And he had success. And the reason he had success, is if you look at it, is that he would take people in and he would have them eat whole foods, which is good, even if it's vegetables, and stop smoking, meditation or relaxation, gentle exercise, and getting massages and stuff, cut the stress. And surprisingly, these people didn't have heart attacks. And he didn't talk about the lack of smoking, didn't talk about the relaxation and the cutting, and doing the meditation and all that stuff. He talked about it as just being purely a vegetable, no saturated fat, no animal product type of a diet. And so McGovern just came out of this center when he started the hearings, and that influenced him, because obviously Nathan Pritikin back in those days was a pretty big name in how to eat properly, even though there was no scientific evidence that this stuff had any validity. Okay, and so you had McGovern was influenced this way, and then the guy who actually wrote the report worked for McGovern. The guy had no background in nutrition and science. He was actually a journalism major in college, and he worked for McGovern. He wrote the report. And the thing with him is he was a Seventh Day Adventist, as far as I know. I think that's proven. And he was a hardcore vegetarian, and he ignored almost all the evidence that did not point to a vegetarian type diet. And that's why if you go back to the old food pyramid, it was like real heavy on the grains, real heavy on vegetables, and really sparing on the meat and dairy and fats. Even though at that point there were a lot of scientists. And one of the key ones is a British scientist named Yudkin, who wrote a book, White and Deadly. I think that's the name. It was about salt being the real cause of heart attacks. But Yudkin was in major conflict with Ansel Keys, and Ansel Keys was a really strong personality, and he didn't like you arguing with him, and he took Yudkin and beat him up essentially on in the academic world and in the press, and Yudkin lost his Harvard position. I think he was at Harvard at that point, and no one really knew about his book for the longest time until after his death. And then we rediscovered it and went, wow, the guy was right all along. That's what started at. Now, why is that important? Because remember, you're talking late 60s is when Ansel Keys is writing all this stuff and doing his research, flawed research. 70s is when it started getting published, and when it came up in the Senate hearings and stuff. In the 80s is when it really hit big time, and that's when he started getting all the books and all the medical schools. What little they taught about nutrition was based on all this stuff. All the nutrition schools was based on this, right? All of big food and big pharma picked up on this, and they started pushing it. And so you have this problem, is that the science is really old and it's very flawed, right? Now, there is one book, if let's see here if I can get this okay, I'll put a link for it on in thing. It's called Nutrition in Crisis. It's by Dr. Richard David Feinman. I know Dr. Feinman. He may not remember me, but I know him. I've talked to him several times, a couple times at various conferences and online, and I've read his book a couple times. And basically, what he talks about is all the flawed studies, all the misleading advice that came from this, and how people who are studying human metabolism really don't know what they're doing for the most part, because of the way the studies are structured. We'll talk more about this, but basically the studies are not good studies. They're not good scientific studies. So don't really get too enamored with what you see coming out. People say, oh, this new study from this school says, that you have to eat nothing but cantaloupe, and that's what's healthy for you. Trust me, it's all bogus stuff. It really is. You got to go back to what is the basis, and that's what I try to show you the evidence for, so that you can make up your own mind. All right. So if you have any questions, leave me a message. Contact me. And remember, I always have my health coaching platform, $10 a month. It's real easy to get on. First 7 days are on trial, so you can check it out, see what you like, and you get personal access to me. Appreciate it. Everyone, have a good time. Bye.